So this is that piece of wood that I showed you the other day that was leaning up against the wall in my hallway. And today's problem is that the smoother of the two sides has a bunch of dings and one really big knot hole with nothing in it. Unlike this, which I can just sand over that and that's fine. But this is a big old hole, and that's a problem. So obviously I could flip it over, and this side is definitely smoother, but it has the ink marks from the lumber company. So my life today is going to be about trying to sand off the ink, and I'm not really sure if I can do that or not. I've never really tried to do it, but I'm gonna give it a shot. So I've gotten it this far. This was a little bit of hand sanding and a little bit of electric sanding because the hand sanding wasn't making enough of a dent. And the ink marks are paler than they were. I kind of feel like I'm going to do one more pass with the electric sander and another pass with sanding by hand. And then I'm going to default to my favorite design expression: if you can't fix it, feature it. If I can't get rid of these marks, then I'm going to position the elements that I'm going to paint over them. And what I'm thinking of doing is sketching out some things on paper and then cutting them out and applying them as decals, so that I can cover over what's here and use the better side of wood, even though it still has ink marks on it. So that's the plan of attack for now. I think the next thing I need to do after I do one more sanding is do a little sealing. So I'm prepping this for a little sealant, and I've already wiped it down with a paper towel to get some of the dust off. But now I'm just gonna, I have just a barely damp washcloth, and I'm just gonna wipe this down to make sure I get all the schmutz off it, because this has been standing behind my workroom door for a little while, and it's got dirt and dust and dog hair and all sorts of fun stuff all over it. So I just want to make sure it's clean before I put any sealer on it. And you can see my little ink marks are barely noticeable now. So maybe I'll cover them over, but if that doesn't work out, maybe I'll just call them texture and leave it there, because they're not as annoying as they were before. I am going to try and cover over this knot hole though, because those tend to be a little distracting when they pop up in a composition, unless they're in the background. But I think what I have in mind for this piece, probably the knot hole isn't going to work. So now that my wood is sanded and clean, I'm going to do a little sealer coat. And the reason I'm doing this is because the wood I'm using is pine, and it's very porous. It will suck the paint into it rather than allowing it to sit on top. So I'm doing a little sealer so that the paint will sit on top of the sealer coat rather than on top of the wood and get sucked into the wood. So the theory is that I do a couple of light coats of this and it gets sucked into the wood instead of my paint, which will result in much less cussing. So what I'm mixing up here is a little bit of matte medium and a little bit of water. I don't usually recommend thinning acrylic products with water because it breaks down the binder. But in this case, since it's going to get sucked into the wood anyway, it doesn't really matter. And what I'm going to do is apply this, and the angle of my work light over there shows me what's shiny and what's dull, what's had a little bit of this put onto it and what still needs it. So I'm going to do a coat of this, and then I'm going to do a little sanding, because putting water onto wood like this raises the grain just a little bit, and I want a nice smooth surface to paint on, so I want it not to be raised too much. So that means sanding, and then another coat, and maybe another sanding, until I can apply a coat of this and nothing happens. And that's when I know that the wood is sealed and it won't absorb my paint. It will just let it sit on the surface. I wanted to mention, as I'm applying my second coat, that I'm also doing the sides. And what I'm doing is doing this side, and I've got some wax paper down, and then I'm going to flip this over and seal the back and the other side, and that way I can do it without making too much of a mess. So I'm up to, I think this is my second coat on this side. I probably won't do too many coats on the other side of this, because it's just going to be a solid color. It's going to be the side that's up against the wall. So no big deal if it's not perfect, because I'm probably the only person who will ever see it. And I'm trying to maneuver this so that as I'm applying this to the side, I'm not leaving the wood sitting in a puddle of medium. So what I'm probably going to do is come by after I finish this coat and change the wax paper to something dry, and maybe wipe down the underside, so that I'm not ending up with a huge mess on the backside. Little mess is okay. Huge mess, not so much. And there's my wood ready to go, ready to paint on the easel. The only problem is that it's too tall for me to put the top clamp on, so I'm going to have to figure out how to hold it in place, because without that clamp it tends to rock back and forth a little bit. This is my solution to not being able to use the top clamp, which is laying over here now. This is a scrap piece of oak from a framing project that I did, and a little C-clamp, and it's sitting right on top, and it seems to be holding, and my piece isn't rocking back and forth anymore. So that's my cheesy solution to not being able to clamp my work.